6 ways your mind builds discipline. There is a particular kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with sleep. You wake up rested, technically, and yet by mid-morning something in you has already gone quiet. Not lazy, not unmotivated in the way people talk about motivation, just muted. Like the signal is there, but the volume keeps dropping on its own. And the strangest part is that you know what you want. You can picture it clearly. The version of your life where you follow through, where you stay consistent, where the gap between intention and action finally closes. You can see it. You just cannot seem to hold on to it. Most people around you have a word for that. They call it a lack of willpower or discipline. And that framing carries a quiet judgment inside it, that something is weak in you, something underdeveloped, something that other, more capable people simply have and you do not. That story is not just unhelpful, it is neurologically wrong. What is actually happening is more interesting than that, and understanding it changes everything about how you relate to your own behavior. The mind does not build discipline the way we were told it does. It is not a muscle you exhaust and train through suffering. It is not a moral quality distributed unequally among people who earned it or did not. Discipline, at its most accurate, is a set of psychological and neurological conditions that either exist in your environment and your body or do not. And there are 6 distinct ways the mind actually constructs it. The first is through identity, not intention. Research from behavioral science shows that when people act in alignment with how they see themselves, they need far less effort to sustain behavior. The friction of starting dissolves. This is not about affirmations, it's about the specific story your nervous system is telling about who you are. When that story and the behavior point in the same direction, the action stops feeling like a decision. It becomes something closer to inevitability. The second is through environment design, which is really a way of acknowledging how much of human behavior is not consciously chosen at all. Your brain is extraordinarily lazy in the most efficient sense of the word. It follows the path of least cognitive resistance, consistently. Studies on habit formation show that the physical and social cues surrounding a behavior predict its occurrence more reliably than conscious intention does. Discipline, in this frame, is less about trying harder and more about arranging your world so that the right thing to do is also the easiest thing to do. The third involves the nervous system directly, and this is the piece people talk about the least. Chronic stress, poor sleep, dysregulated cortisol, these do not just make you feel bad, they actively impair the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for planning, impulse control, and long-term thinking. When the nervous system is stuck in a state of low-grade threat, the brain prioritizes survival over strategy. You are not failing at discipline. Your brain has simply redirected its resources. The fourth is through what researchers call intrinsic motivation, the quality of the reason behind an action. There is now substantial evidence from self-determination theory that when behavior is driven by external pressure, comparison, shame, or fear, it produces short bursts of effort, followed by burnout and avoidance. When the motivation is genuinely internal, curiosity, meaning, a sense of alignment with something valued, the energy sustains itself differently. The body does not register it as depletion in the same way. The fifth is through the accumulation of evidence. This is quieter than the others. Every time you do what you said you would do, even in the smallest possible way, you are updating the brain's internal model of who you are. Neuroscience describes this through the lens of predictive processing. The brain is constantly making predictions about the future based on patterns from the past. Small, consistent follow-throughs teach the brain to predict that you will follow through, and then it begins to act accordingly, as if consistent behavior were simply the thing that happens next. The sixth is through what might be called nervous system co-regulation. Humans are a deeply social species, and their capacity for self-regulation is not entirely self-contained.
The physiological state of the people around you, their calm, their focus, their sense of purposefulness, genuinely influences your own nervous system through pathways involving the autonomic nervous system and what researchers describe as social engagement. The environments you place yourself in and the people who occupy them are doing something to your body's ability to sustain effort. This is not a metaphor, it is biological. None of this makes someone better or worse than anyone else. Someone raised in chaos, in unpredictability, in environments that demanded constant vigilance, their nervous system learned what it needed to learn to survive. Someone who was told early that their worth was conditional on performance built entirely different internal architecture around effort and action. These are adaptations, responses to conditions, not character flaws. And here is where it gets genuinely interesting, because there is a paradox buried in all of this. The people who appear most disciplined from the outside feel the least effort inside, not because they are superior, but because their conditions, the story they carry, the environment they have shaped, the state of their nervous system, have aligned in a way that removes most of the friction. Discipline that looks heroic from the outside is often invisible from the inside. It has been built quietly through these 6 systems until following through became the path of least resistance rather than the hardest one. Which means that if you're white-knuckling your way through every attempt at consistency, fighting yourself constantly, relying purely on willpower as a renewable resource, you are not failing at discipline. You're attempting a much harder version of it. The version that ignores these systems entirely and asks the conscious mind to compensate for all of them at once. It works for a while. It almost always collapses eventually. And then the collapse gets mislabeled as a personal failing rather than a design problem. Your experience makes sense. The inconsistency makes sense. The gap between who you want to be and what you actually do on a given Tuesday morning, that gap is not evidence of weakness. It is information about which of these 6 systems is currently missing or misaligned. That is a workable problem. It's actually a solvable one. You are not broken. You are operating in conditions that were never fully accounted for in the story you were told about what discipline is. If something in this landed quietly, not as motivation but as recognition, there is more worth understanding about how your particular mind works, about why the patterns that feel most frustrating often have the clearest psychological explanations, about what it actually looks like when these systems begin to align, not through force, but through something much closer to understanding.